Okay, without further ado, I will turn this over to our experienced coach. I'm sure there are other experienced coaches on the call as well, but there are two with us, Teep from Cambodia and Alan from Kenya, who will be doing their presentations. I'm not sure which one of them would like to start first. Perhaps Teep, you could get us started.
Hi there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I hope that you are well. And if I tend to slide my head over to this direction, it means that I'm using the camera here and then I'm seeing all of you from this screen instead. Um, so yeah, as for introductions, my name is Tep. I have been coaching the Jessup for about 6 years. I myself participated back in 2018 and 2019. And then ever since, I was either advising or coaching the Jessup. My experience is not only with the Jessup, I've also advised in a minor capacity with the International Commercial Arbitration Moot Court, and as well as the most recent being the ICC Moot Court. It is nice to meet you all, and I look forward to offering some insight and probably some guidance to the new faces or the new coaches of the Jessup this year. Thank you. Handing it over to Alan.
Yes, thank you, Tip. And thank you, Roxana. And good to see you, Michael, again. Alan Mukoki is my name. I am a lawyer by profession, I think 10 years now. I've coached 3 Jessup teams, and this year, we finished as quarterfinalist in the team. I've coached teams I've won Nuremberg, I've won ICC. We were number 2 in the ICC last year. We've won Nelson Mandela. So we've done a couple of moves. We have a variety of processes that we go through in Strathmore, which I'll get to explain later. But also, I'm an international lawyer. I advise government, regions, and entities on matters of international law. And I teach international law as well. So I guess I'll leave it at that, and then we'll get to discuss more when we get into the question. Thank you.
Thank you very much to both of you. Okay, so let's start with maybe some of the introductory questions that we received. As I think perhaps we can start with someone asked, what should I be guided by when selecting participants for the team? Which qualities should be given priority and which qualities are of secondary importance? And someone else asked a similar question, the most important criteria for selecting oralists. Maybe let's start with that question.
Would you want to?
Well, I think I could start. Our process is a bit interesting, so allow me to break it down in processes. So before Strathmore Law School gets into any Jessup moot competition, they start training for it 3 years in advance. And this is how we do it. Ours is a very different process. We identify the team that would represent us in Jessup when they are in second year. So we have an internal moot competition within the law school. So we have around 600 students, and we have an internal moot competition where first year to fourth years compete with each other. And then the best teams then are selected to represent us in 10 international moot competitions and regional ones in Africa, in Europe, and international ones. So through that process, we identify the students that we think could be trained for Jessup, and we start training them in a manner of which as if we're preparing them for Jessup, but 3 years in advance. So in terms of selection, because Jessup is more of an international law moot competition, and the in terms of the questioning from the judges and the criteria, or rather the panelist of judges that we find there, are quite high caliber. So then what we do is these students that we've identified 3 years in advance, we train them with other competitions. So we take them to Nuremberg moot competition, ICC moot competition, which is also international, and also Nelson Mandela World Human Rights moot competition. And we use this as training grounds for them to be able to, I mean, we end up winning most of them or end up being among the top teams. But we use it as, because for some reason we fear Jessup more than we fear any other moot competition. So we take time to prepare it, select a team that you think that would be ready for Jessup. Then when the year comes, we then take the team to Jessup. So like for instance, we were in Jessup this year. We do not have a team for next year, Jessup 2026, but we've already identified a pool of around 10 students, which will narrow down to 5 students for 2027 when we'll do Jessup again. So next year we'll be training them through different competitions. So we do a myriad of approaches. Good speakers. So for instance, in my Jessup team this year, where we finished as quarterfinalists, we had 4 good speakers. 2 had won Nuremberg, 2 had been runners-up in the ICC moot of 2024, and then 1 good researcher. So we had decided that we'd choose 2 speakers, 2 who are very good in presenting as applicants in terms of their convincing ability, and 2 who are very good as defense, those who are able to stand their ground even if drowned in sort of a waterboarding incident as such, where they'd be able to stand their ground. So we were able to mix and match the teams based on their strengths. And then having selected them from internals, we then now start training them, because for Jessup this year, we trained them for almost 6-7 months continuously, and we were meeting daily just to, I always tell them, eat, sleep, drink, walk, Jessup. So anytime you think about anything, it's just Jessup. And again, the results were seen when we participated in the competition this year. So in brief, that's what we do. So we identify a team some years back, and then we train them now towards the competition that we want to participate in as it approaches. So I'll leave it at that and maybe invite her to here.
Yeah, so there are a few things I would like to add on. A few things that are also very shocking that you have started 3 years before you actually start to compete. So that's a lot of time. It's a little bit different from my experience with coaching. So to preface, I did coach a team from my US law school as well as team from my Cambodian law school, and the 2 jurisdictions do have a difference in their selection process. In Cambodia, we have a tryout where we would conduct this sort of mini mock moot competition to get an interest from the batch of students, and the students will be given about 2 weeks to um, to prepare their memorials and prepare their oral pleadings. And this tryout process, because it's only for 2 weeks, we tend to just pick 2 of the 4 topics from the Jessup problem of that year to be the inspiration the for the tryout. For my US law school, it's a little bit different. It's easier actually, where students are just required to submit their CV and their motivational letter as to why they want to be a part of the Jessup team. Both have their pros and cons, and it's the reasoning for why those processes exist is very contextual. For my US law school, there's not a lot of interest in international law because the students are in a US law school, and the US and international law do not jive well together, unfortunately. But it's a stark difference compared to students from Cambodia. There are a lot of students interested and wanting to join the Jessup. The Jessup in Cambodia is the biggest and the most prestigious. Everyone wants to be a part of the Jessup team, and our universities do have a good track record of the Jessup, of having always been crowned the national champions and always qualified to compete in the international rounds. In terms of the qualities, I don't have much difference from what Alan had said in terms of the character traits that the students may have or what we're looking for. So I will just list down a few things. First and foremost, English. English proficiency is the most important thing that I look for in the candidate because, the students are required to read, write, speak, and analyze legal English. And so if a student shows not that, if they show that they don't have a good grasp of the English language, most likely that candidate will not make it on to the team. And again, it's very contextual because in certain jurisdictions, including Cambodia, English is not our mother tongue. And so, um, but that doesn't mean that it should be an indicator to reject that candidate if they do apply for your Jessup team, right? Sometimes they may have a speech impediment. They may not be able to speak that fluently in English, but they can show their proficiency in writing or researching. If that's the case, if the student just has an issue with speaking, but not writing or researching when it comes to their English, you can also admit that student and have them be your team's dedicated researcher. Because at the end of the day, you're allowed 5 students, right? And I would try to fill in all 5 slots for being speakers or the mooters, and then the 5th member can be the team's dedicated researcher. The second thing that I look for would be the students' appearance of professionalism. At the end of the day, I tell the students that the Jessup is a 9 to 5 job, and so they are supposed to treat it as such. As Alan has put it, they eat, sleep, and work with the Jessup every single day. And so that is the expectation that I place on the students. The next point would be about commitment. I do not allow, it's a little bit controversial, but I do not allow my students to have breaks, meaning national holidays or winter breaks, Christmas, New Year's. They are not accorded that at all. And at the very start of the meeting, when I first see the students, we sort of discuss together as to what we want. And if the students are really ambitious, they say that they want to be in the top 48, the top 32, they want best memo, they want to be the champions. If they want to be champions, they have to make sacrifices and work like champions. Last but not least would be discipline. And it's self-explanatory. You would want students who are able to hold themselves accountable because the Jessup is 8 months long. There's bound to be students who is going to be prone to burning out because of how much they are required to do on a daily or a weekly basis. And so students who are able to not only manage their time, but also hold themselves accountable for certain weeks that they underperform is a good indicator of a responsible student that you would want onto the team. All of these points can be evaluated and gauge if you do hold a tryout. And so the tryout, to just mention a little bit more details on that, we usually hold a tryout ideally 1 month before September 15th when the Jessup problem actually drops. And so that would provide you as the coach sufficient time to select a team and then maybe have some preliminary training for the students to get everybody on the same page as to how to write, how to research. These are the refreshers of public international law lessons, so on and so forth. And so when the problem drops, there's not going to be any more preliminary trainings, and it's just the moot. I hope that was responsive to the question.
Okay, thank you both for all of that. I'll just note, as I'm sure you're all aware, under the Jessup rules, you can have anywhere between 2 and 5 team members, and everyone tends to have their own structure in terms of how many students they select. And as has been discussed, there are different approaches to that. I think it's important to be just clear up front with the students regarding, if you do have 5 people, what their roles are going to be during the year, so that there aren't any false expectations in terms of oral speaking or researcher positions. But there are different approaches to take to that. Okay. So another question that we received is, how do you approach the first reading of the Jessup problem, and do you have a specific method for issue spotting with the team?
Maybe I'll take that. I think once the Jessup question is released, any mood that we train our students in, I have a rule that they have to read the question 10 times individually and 10 times as a group. It may look like a whole lot of times, and I make sure I read myself as well 10 times the question. Why that is important is when they read it 10 times as students, they first get to appreciate what the question is about and what the issues are. Then when they read it together as a group, after reading alone 10 times, then they now read together. When they read it together, they now realize issues that they may have not identified when they were reading alone. And then after they have done, remember they have read 10 alone, 10 together, then now I join them in that whole process where we go through the question, paragraph by paragraph, line by line, to identify the issues before we even say this is what we need to argue it out. So in terms of the question, first reading, I always prefer 10 times. I mean, it may look like a lot, but it plays a huge role in understanding of the fact. That's why if you watch the Jessup rounds, you'll always see a speaker saying, according to paragraph 10, without even looking at the facts, because they have internalized it in them to the extent that it has now become part of them. And that also helps them relate that to the laws that they'll cite. It will help them relate to also the writings that they will cite, because all I'll need to say is, according to paragraph 10 of this law, this is what has been said, and this can be seen as was said in the ICC or in the ICJ in this particular case in paragraph this. So it's the starting point of internalizing the moot question before you now get into the nitty-gritties of case law and writings preparation. So yes, it may look like a lot, but they have to read it 10 times before, 10 times together, 10 times alone, 10 times together, and then we now go through it together. So that takes a process of almost 3 weeks before now we say, now let's meet, that you've had the question, now let's dissect it line by line. So that's the approach that I use in my coaching.
That's very interesting, Alan, because it's the same strategy that I employ to my students as well. The moment the problem is released, I would tell the students to just read on their own again and again and again and again. And after maybe 3 or 4 days, I will meet with them, and then we will go through the problem line by line, word by word, paragraph by paragraph. And I agree with their approach because I also employ them too. Read the last few paragraphs of the problem first. Understand what the parties in the problem are trying to argue for, and then maybe look a little bit. The last few paragraphs also before the I guess let's say if the two parties are saying that, hey, we want the court to adjudge and declare blah, 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 the few paragraphs before that paragraph is also relevant, especially when the moot problem indicates or stipulates that these are the relevant treaties the parties are have ratified or have acceded to or are signatories to, so on and so forth. That also gives teams a clue as to what treaties are meant to be analyzed, but they're not mandatory. Sometimes they are distracting treaties. Sometimes it's mentioned that they are state parties, but you do not even have to make arguments in the memorials at all. And so when it comes to issue spotting, I would try to categorize the paragraphs into three things. One, distracting information or distracting facts. Two, it would be contextual flavor, facts or paragraph that just adds or advances the story. And then last but not least would be the very important facts or important paragraphs, facts that you need to have in your arguments. And so if teams want to do a better job at issue spotting, try to also categorize the facts into those three categories. But sometimes it's malleable too. Sometimes the one thing that I love about the Jessup is that you have about 50 to 70 paragraphs depending on the story. And sometimes you have to read the problem again and again and again and again up until the very end, up until your international rounds. Because, you know, one day you might not spot the issue, you might not understand how these sort of different paragraphs at different stages of the compromise, they don't really have a relationship. But then students are required to stitch these paragraphs together to tell a narrative. Like when in isolation, these paragraphs don't really make sense. But when you combine together, then it starts to, you know, sort of clarify the attitude of the state. It explains certain things that were not explained before if you read those paragraphs in isolation. And so, yeah, to recap, it's just task the student to read word by word, line by line, paragraph by paragraph, and then you meet with them and you repeat the process so that everybody starts on the same page when it comes to understanding what the paragraph or what the facts or the sentences really mean.
Okay, thank you both for that. This question, I think, is something you've touched on a little bit, but maybe you can speak about it in a more formal way. Do you hold regular meetings with the team, or do you let them progress at their own pace and provide support only when needed? And which do you think is the most effective?
I think from my side, once the question is out, I think it must have been the heaviest preparation period, especially this last Jessup for this year, because I met my team daily. Apart from weekends, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, but Monday to Thursday and sometimes even Friday, we would meet every day for around 2 to 3 hours, either early in the morning, our morning person. So they had to wake up at 5 a.m. sometimes to have a meeting, or I would agree with them and say, oh, very well, let's do evening, where we start our meetings at 8 p.m. till around 11 p.m. And it may look like a lot because when we counted the hours, we reckoned that we did more than almost 220 hours of training. And this was constantly meeting daily and just discussing the issues. And so we had two different approaches. So, or rather, our standard approach at Strathmore is you'll always have the training days, then you will always have the workshop days. And the training days, especially for memorials, everyone is involved because it's research, it's writing, it's confirming everything is okay, with a ban on AI, because I make sure that at least before you even think of ChatGPT and everything, you have read the decision. So because international law is what I do a lot. So if I give you the arrest warrant case, for example, I expect you to read it from cover to cover, not go to ChatGPT and say, summarize this for me. And that's why you'd hear students say, according to paragraph 20 of this case, so during the research phase, most of the work is put there, because once your research is done well, then the oral become easy because you already selected students who can speak. And then now, so that when you get into the oral stage training, you now, after the memorials have been submitted, you now get deeper into now it's training. I always tell my students that learn how to sing, in the sense of learn how to speak and with pauses, tonal variation, facial expression, not too much, not too little, but just the right amount. And that takes a lot of training in that respect. So For the memorial writing, I let them take charge of that process. Of course, mine is to oversee, make sure every footnote makes sense, every word used in the memorial makes sense. But then they do most of the heavy lifting. And of course, I guide them based on my expertise and experience. Then now when it comes to the oral, then now I take charge of that process, because then I create the schedule and how long they have to meet, how many times in a week, what are we arguing that day, is it a workshop? And anytime we meet, they argue the entire case from start to end, applicants and respondent. And so they go against each other. Then the next day you find that they change again. It becomes respondents, applicants, until when you select the team as it should be. So that's how, at least for us, when it comes to meeting, it's almost on a daily basis from when the question is announced to when the moot is over. It's almost a daily basis kind of thing. Thank you.
Slightly different approach from Alan's. For per week, I would try to meet the students at least 3 times, and I would dedicate the weekends to the advisors. You, as the coach, especially for the new coaches here, you're also able to employ coaching assistants. I call them my CAs. They act as my general, my eyes and ears, for when I'm not with the students, they can take charge. And the idea is intentional. It's not only for me to have some level of or degree of separation from the students, but also it's to allow the recent Jessup graduates to also foster and polish their leadership skills to make their best decisions, for example, for when I am not there to answer questions. Um, so in terms of meetings, it's 2 to 3 times per week, and per meeting, it can go anywhere from 3 to 6 hours. And it really depends on the flexibility of the team. You can employ a mixture of physical to virtual meetings. Physical meetings are usually done in the morning or in the afternoon. And then I would also have sometimes virtual meetings late at night. We can go anywhere from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. in the morning. And in terms of the frequency, it depends on our progress as well. If the memo is in a really bad spot by November, then we really have to pick up. And so I would add more and more meeting times. The same approach I do employ to the meetings as we were nearing our national rounds, which was around February 22nd and 23rd last year, or this year. Um, the meetings were almost every single day. Either students who were very weak with their pleadings, I would meet with them every single night so that they practice, practice, practice. And so it's contextual. It really depends on the capacity of the students, but I think both of our approach signals at being disciplined and being professional. You have to be consistent because, as Michael have noted, in the past, the Jessup is one of those competitions where the best universities are participating and the best universities are bringing some of their best students on to this competition. And so, you have to compete at the same level as these other jurisdictions who may perform better, and you don't want to be embarrassed at either the national or international round, so they have to pick up. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think this is a good point. I've gotten a couple of questions on this general topic. Sort of how involved should the coaches get with the team? How involved should I be with the team's research? And what are the lines? I'd just like to point out before I turn this over for answers that you should definitely look at Official Rule 2.9, which is titled Assistance from Team Advisors. And this does contain a list of what the advice that a team advisor should be giving. So team advisors' advice is restricted to general instruction on the basic principles of international law, general advice on research sources and methods, general advice on memorial writing techniques, general advice on oral advocacy techniques, general advice on the organization and structure of arguments, general commentary on the quality of the team's legal and factual arguments, and advice interpretation of the rules, and advice as to pleading options or similar strategic decisions. So I just wanted to point that rule out to you. But of course, as to the implementation of that, I will let the coaches also say a few words about this.
I suppose I will start. I'll follow up on that question of how involved should the coach be. I agree with Roxana. You should keep your instructions very general. But I think there can be opportunities where, let's say, the students have spent a lot of time on doing something. They try to follow your instructions to the best of their abilities, but they are still unable to come to the conclusion that you want them to. And so, as part of the preliminary trainings, before the Jessup problem even drops, I may sometimes find a problem or a legal question, and then I would sort of show them in real time, okay, this is how you do your research. This is where you should try to locate the source material. And then this is how you should read that source material. And after that, this is how you should analyze, annotate, so on and so forth. So it's like showing them in real time on how to do these things, but only after you've already seen that they have put in work and sufficient time to do the work, but they are still coming up short of your expectation. And I think Alan has answered this too, in allowing the students to sort of take charge. You are there to provide oversight. You're not there to sort of dictate what arguments should what arguments should be, or how it should be written, so on and so forth. You're there to provide guidance, but it's to allow the students to take ownership of their own product at both the memorial writing phase and also the oral reading phase. And so you're teaching them to be independent, to make their best judgment. My student, one of them is here too, and they would cringe at every time when I tell them to use their best judgment, because it saved me time from having to explain what there is, and they are they're forced to make the decisions for themselves. And I think that is a good thing, especially when they are approaching their graduation years. You have a responsibility to cultivate the next generation of lawyers. And so instilling that principle of allowing them to make independent decisions and live with the decisions, no matter how wrong they can go, it's for their own personal growth.
I think just to add on to that also, I think most of what has been said is what we do on our side, or rather I do on my side, because you let the students take charge of the entire process. That's why you're a coach or an advisor to that extent. So especially when it comes to writing of the memorials, I mean, oral training has a more hands-on kind of training, but for memorial writing and development and research, it's the students now. Remember the 10 times you meet them, I asked them to read alone, and then the 10 times I asked them to read together. The 10 times that I asked them to read together was now them trying to create the team synergy amongst themselves, so that they're able to see who is strong in what area, in what topic. Then if they decide they're going to divide the topics on their own, then they do that, I think. But for me, what I prefer is if there are 5 team members, they all work on the applicant side together and finalize on that. And then they move to the respondent side together and work on that. So that way they all know all sides of the argument. I like calling it a schizophrenic mindset, so that when you're arguing as an applicant, you already anticipate what the respondent would have, and you've submitted both documents, applicants and respondents, so they take charge of that, and I try push them to have that schizophrenic mindset that if you've argued there is no diplomatic immunity as an applicant, then as a respondent, you need to say there is diplomatic immunity. How do you counter an argument that you have just made on this other side? That schizophrenic mindset helps them to be able to work together and take charge of the process, and also dissect every point that they make without leaving anything to chance. So as has been said, that just you let them take charge, you facilitate the process in the long run.
Okay, next question is, when do you start preparing for the oral rounds?
Maybe I can pick that. Then I think for us, as soon as we've submitted the memorials, it's now time to start the oral rounds, and that's around almost a period of 3 months. That's why the sort of team that you select is very important, because the team that you select would either need a lot of work in oral training or are already experienced in oral training. So you just need now to brush up their skills based on the argument that they have given. So it's usually around 2 to 3 months on our side. As soon as the memorials have been submitted, we now switch gears into oral training so that one comes after the other instead of both coming together.
I employ a totally different approach, but it all depends on the capacity of the students. If I find that they are not so inexperienced, not so experienced speakers, then I would do the same thing that Alan is doing, and that is to wait after the memorial submission to go all in with the oral pleadings training. However, if I do find that the students do have the capacity and capability of starting pleadings early, I would start at around November. That is usually the time when we have already had the 4 claims sort of drafted out. We sort of know the general outline as to where to go. We just need to fill in the specifics, still determining how to move the arguments around to make sure that there's a flow, it is coherent, it makes sense. And so starting oral pleadings early, it's like killing 2 birds with 1 stone. One, you are teaching them at an early stage how to plead their case. Second, there's a psychological effect, I believe, when the students do speak their arguments out loud. They are able to gauge how extreme their arguments can be. Sometimes when they are too tunnel visioned with drafting the memorial or trying to craft their arguments, they do not know that they have already crossed the line of making an extreme argument. And so when they do say it out loud to their teammates, then their teammates can point out that it doesn't sound that good. You know, on paper it sounds nice, but when you speak it out loud, it's not that good. And so it gives an extra opportunity for the students to just comment, hey, maybe we should tweak this argument this way, that way, so on and so forth. But still depends on the capacity and the capability of the students. For me, I would generally start at around November. And that is also to take into account that English is not our first language, and students do struggle, even though they are proficient in reading and writing. Speaking is our biggest obstacle. We don't sound as charismatic as teams from other jurisdiction whose English is their mother tongue. And I would like to recall to Alan's point of singing, names trained to sing. At the international rounds or the national rounds, every team is going to be singing the same song. But the team that gets the most point knows how to sing that song a little bit differently. It sounds nicer, and so it gives them the edge when it comes to scoring. Uh, for for my specific case, I tend to start meetings very early because of those impediments.
Okay, great. Next question is, what is the optimal level of formality with the students? And somewhat related question, how do you deal with conflicts between team members that might arise?
Interesting question, because I've tried to think, am I usually formal with the students? I think I'm very formal, but then I try break the ice so that they are able to approach you with any difficulties that they face as a team. So for me, that aspect of breaking that barrier so that they are able to, and I try break that barrier by, sometimes I'll take them for lunch or we'll have dinner together as a team just to hear what their research is about, what area they have a challenge in. Because also for us as experts in the field, we also get to learn and read a lot about these areas. So in terms of formality, I think it depends with how comfortable you are with letting your guard down in one way or another so that the students are able to get to you. Most of the time, they're not able to get to you if you create a wall with them. The second part of the question was on?
If there are conflicts that arise between team members, how you handle that?
Again, this is very common, especially among students. So what I try do is I try push them to I try to push them to always deal with anything that has happened between them, and the team will always have a team captain who would be the first level of dealing with any issue, unless they think they need to escalate it to me. But again, this is different from when you have a very difficult team member who has refused for all purposes and intent to abide, let's say show up for meetings, has refused to basically work with the team. That's the point now, as has been said, the team usually has 2 to 5 people and we've selected 5. If you do away with 1, you can still go with 4. And sometimes we've had to employ such measures where if there's a difficult team member, you then get out 1 team member who has been destabilizing the team maybe over a period of a couple of weeks. Then you now continue with the 4, because then you don't also change the entire team and you destabilize everything. So sometimes it's a judgment approach where you judge what is the best approach for you to handle this. And that's why the team captain sometimes helps in handling the issue in between, unless they are not able to at a certain point, then it's escalated, then you decide to deal with it in the way that you deem fit. Yeah.
I agree with Alan. I am not a micro manager, and I would remind the team always, if they do have a problem with one another, do try to speak it out. If they are unable to resolve their dispute, then push it to the advisors. That is, again, those are my generals. And if still the dispute is not resolved, then it'll escalate to me. It depends on the issue, and usually it's going to be. Uh, I never had an issue with students not being committed or students having an issue with another student's commitment, so on and so forth. Everyone shows up on meetings and stuff like that. Um, the most difficult issues to solve is ego. When some members of the team feel like they are superior than others. So you just have to find a way to, uh, well, the first recourse would be to let them work in isolation. It does break the team spirit, but at least it keeps the team together. Um, uh, Even though they're working in isolation, they can still communicate. They can still say, hey, I found this case, so on and so forth. You would want to read this and stuff like that. But you would want to try to limit their interaction as much as possible. If it comes to a point where, for example, both candidates are good, but one is just too arrogant, the other is just too passive, and their disputes are not resolved, or if they both have strong personalities, then uh, because you have 5 members, don't hesitate to just remind them that hey, if you're not going to stop, then I'm going to drop you, right? Because you are expected to be professional, and this is an 8 months worth of work. And if this is going to be your attitude, this is going to be your habit, then, I would not hesitate to drop you so that, the team can still move forward. So that's for the conflict resolution. In terms of formality, so I would suggest a balance of setting boundaries. You are their coach, you're not their friend, right? But try to be as flexible to the extent that, like you have said, to invite them to lunch or dinner, maybe after a long day's work, maybe just order pizza or take them out to eat or something, and then uh, do get to know your students more. They're not just student A, student B, student C, student D. They have their names, they have their unique problems, unique circumstances, they have their own lives, and it's to foster that relationship so that they are more open to you. But at the same time, it's like you have a boundary, you are a coach, but you're not approachable. That when they do have they feel safe enough to you and just say, hey, coach, I have this difficulty in doing this, doing that. I think it's that is for the better. It's like a balance between setting boundaries, but also making yourself available to the students' need. You are, at the end of the day, their coach. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, and one other question before I'm going to turn over to Michael Pyle briefly to answer a couple of sort of more technical questions. And that is, do you have any tips and tricks for maintaining high motivation throughout the preparation period?
That's that's sometimes, as has been mentioned, sometimes you let the students develop their own ways of coping, but also sometimes I try get involved in. So I remember like this year, there was a point they had burnout, and they had burnt out because remember, as their students, they're still going through their units. So for us, they'll be doing 7 units at the same time preparing for moot competition, and maybe they're writing their thesis at the same time. So it's madness. So I remember there's a time they burnt out, and we all there was one lady in the team and the 4 gentlemen, and we had to decide to go for almost like a movie. We went for a movie together. A new movie had come out in the cinemas. So I just told them, okay, it's 8 p.m. You're all in the office. Let's just go for a movie so that you stop getting irritated and the like. And so sometimes to keep them motivated is you keep one, again, knowing them as who they are. They are human beings in the end. They're not just student A, B, C, D, as has been mentioned, but also keep encouraging them when you read their memorials and they've written well. Commend them on that, where it's again that motivates them to see, okay, we're doing something, we're actually preparing well when it comes to this writing. So it's just the small things of encouraging them in their writing, encouraging them in their speaking, even when they're speaking. One of my Jessup team members from this year's team, when I met him 2 years ago before I asked him to do the ICC, he could not speak with tonal variation. And I remember we had to listen to High School Musical together, all of us, so that he can learn how to sing. And it was just a 30-minute thing. But again, after that, it was so much fun. And they still refer to that story up to date because of just how it helped them see it's easy to go through the tonal variation. Or also sometimes when they struggle, you watch a moot video together. So whether it's just a ICC, Nuremberg, you go to watch the final and you tell them, yeah, even the best struggle. So you're training. So your aim is to make sure that you're good enough to not struggle at that stage. And even if you do, it's taken you blood, sweat, and tears to get even to that level. So also just aspects of encouragement as they train helps them a lot to build their confidence and build their skills in that respect. So, and actually, through that now, most of my mutis are now moot coaches because now they use the same skills that I've been using to train them to coach other teams. So again, it shows that it has worked, and yeah, that's how you keep them motivated and engaged throughout the 8-month, 10-month period of training and preparing. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, I've noticed that I was speaking muted. I don't have much to add besides trying to think of activities. I think Alan has mentioned a few to go out to movies, to watch a movie together, to watch something together, right? That can be entertaining, but you know, productive and educational at the same time. I would sometimes show students clips. We would watch together clips of Stoots, the um, US, I don't know what to call it. It's like a legal drama, whatever. And it's like, hey, what do you think of this clip? Do you think of this lawyer? Is he charismatic or not? When he's doing his cross-examination. And so it's trying to think of creative ways, I suppose, to come together to maybe watch a movie, watch a clip. Um, and I also echo uh, Alan's point on motivating students, even with uh, things as minor as giving them compliments, right? Because you can't just bash students like, hey, this is 100% wrong all the time. And so that does psychological damage onto the students, and they will think that every memorial that they submit, there's always going to be something wrong. Um, if they do have that view, and if you do feel that from the environment, do try to say that this is something that you did right. This is really good, but this is how you can do it better. So it is tough love, and you should employ a balancing act. You can be tough at certain points, but you should also be loving, caring, compassionate. They are human beings. So yeah, nothing more to.
Thank you. Okay, and now I'd like to bring in Michael again for a question that we got about how will the use of artificial intelligence be evaluated? While a good memorial should be judged in and of itself, judges should be able to discern between unfettered use of AI, i.e. the students should be evaluated vis-a-vis the memorial.
First of all, I'd like to say hi to Rodrigo. Thanks for the question. Rodrigo Labardini, who's also an experienced Jessup coach with one of our very successful teams from Azerbaijan, and I, along with many other people on this call, have been bilaterally discussing the appropriate use of AI now for months. Let me start by saying there are no restrictions on the use of generative artificial intelligence in the Jessup competition. I'm actually working on a video suggested by a couple of coaches where we'll explore the implications of that for things like the plagiarism rule and other interactions with the rules. But much like most US bars and most other bars that have encountered the issue, we don't penalize for the use of generative AI per se. Now, everybody has heard the story of the lawyer here in the United States who submitted briefs that were um, uh, made by AI and had hallucinated citations in them and were just garbage, and he was sanctioned for that. But if you read the opinion, and this is my approach as well, if you read the opinion, the sanctioning decision, they sanctioned him for the content of the briefs for a failure to essentially read or review his briefs before submitting them to the court. The court did not find that there was anything in and of itself unethical or improper about using artificial intelligence. And let's remember the Jessup competition is an educational opportunity, but it's not education like a philosophy department or a literature department or a maths department. We are, at least in part, and depending upon your jurisdiction, we are training lawyers. We're not trying to create um, great writers. We're not trying to create great thinkers for the sake of thinking or whatever. We are a very purposive field of study and field of teaching, and that is to create lawyers. And of necessity, that means creating lawyers for the profession and for the marketplace and for the society that they're going to practice in. We have to create young lawyers who are able to operate in a universe where generative AI already exists. We can't teach for a society that we wish existed. I worry sometimes that that's where we law professors get ourselves in trouble, that we wish the world was a certain way, and so we teach our students like it is that way. And we can't train them for a society like it used to be. They are going to leave law school and enter, again, depending on your jurisdiction, but even in those places where AI has not broken through to the level that it has in, say, the United States, Western Europe, a couple of other places, it's coming for you. And they are going to face serious challenges the moment they pass the bar or the moment they get on the job market, because a lot of firms, a lot of employers, a lot of agencies are saying, why do we need young lawyers when a generative AI can write the same substandard memo that a brand new lawyer could write? Um, and they need to be able to use the tools, be able to find their niche, be able to find their place in the profession in a world where generative AI exists. So the question is, how will artificial intelligence be evaluated? And as the question goes on to say, my answer to that would be, it's not. The memorial is graded as the memorial. And if there are hallucinated citations, if there are uh, garbage, word salad sections of the memorial or whatever, the students will pay for that. And it may well be that what we're seeing in the Jessup, in legal education, and in entry-level lawyering, it may be that what used to be a massive emphasis on research and writing has now become tripartite. You have to still be a good writer because you have to be able to recognize what good writing is. You have to be a good researcher because you have to recognize what good research is. But you also have to be a deft craftsman with the tools that are given to you. And those tools now include things like ChatGPT, Gemini, and other generative AIs. I'll also say that this isn't going away. You know, I hear from our board members, from our friends at Jessup, from our coaches who work for clients, either because they are in-house counsel at a private company or because they're at a law firm that represents clients, that a lot of clients are demanding that their lawyers use generative AI rather than researching every jot and tittle themselves as a cost saving and a time saving measure. And so I like to tell the story. When I was in law school, Westlaw and Lexis had come out with natural language searching. And my older professors, and for that matter, the older partners at the firms that I was working for then in the 1990s, said, well, this is garbage. You know, every law student needs to know how to shepherdize. Every law student needs to know how to pull a book off the shelf and read cases and read law review articles and so on and so forth, which was certainly true when they were young. But by the time I entered into the profession, if you weren't using Lexis and Westlaw and natural language searching at the top of your game, you were wasting a lot of your firm's valuable time. You were wasting a lot of your clients' valuable money, and you were probably not finding the best answers. Now, that being said, dumb use of Lexis or Westlaw can result in a lot of garbage. They are, you know, Lexis and Westlaw is like drinking from a fire hose. You get a lot of information. And I think generative AI has the same strengths and the same weaknesses, and those are inherent to any semi-autonomous tool like this, and aren't going away. So the students, I agree with the end of that statement. Students should be evaluated vis-a-vis their memorial, but those memorials, that finished product that's being evaluated, um, may or may not have used generative AI, and I don't believe at the present moment that uh, that our judges should be drawing any distinction. They should look at the finished product and say, this is a good memorial, I'm giving it a 99. This is a terrible memorial, I'm giving it a 61, and everything in between, without regard to whether that student used Google or Grammarly or ChatGPT or LexisNexis or a really big and expensive bricks and mortar law library.
Okay, thank you. And then last question, someone says, I'd like to understand more about how teams score points. I've reviewed the scoring matrix, but could learn more about how judges award points for each category.
So on this one, I'm afraid at the moment that our answer to that question, the official answer, isn't that satisfying. We and we're talking about raw points here, by the way. Of course, in the Jessup, we have raw points and round points, but what the judges are in charge of awarding is raw points, a score between 50 and 100 for this memorial in front of me, a score of 50 to 100 for this oralist who is arguing in front of me. And we give the following, well, we give the guidance that you see on the scoring matrices. So we give them 5 criteria, and we give them at the moment 4 or 5 descriptive categories: perfect, excellent, good, fair, poor, and a scoring range of what those things are. And in terms of formal guidance, that's all they have. And we rely on our judges to know what the heck that means. Now, there's a great deal of post hoc quality control on our part. You know, I have a spreadsheet that tracks every judge's memorial scores and oral scores and compares them to other judges who graded the same memorial or graded the same oralist or so on and so forth. And I do have conversations with judges at the end of the year and say, hey, you're grading a little high this year, or hey, what was this? You know, what were these scores? These seemed very strange compared to other judges. You know, I don't have time to grade every memorial myself. So what I'm telling them is, boy, 5 other judges saw this memorial. Bye, Kimberly. Thank you. The and yes, we do also, shall we say, retire judges if it just turns out that their scoring curve or whatever it is they're using, it cannot be reconciled with the sort of consensus of judges. Now, we do give informal advice to judges, especially at the international rounds, and that is, if you give any score of 90 or above, that is a suggestion that that student deserves, or that team, if it's a memorial, deserves a plaque of some kind. That the performance that you've just read or the performance that you've just viewed um, uh, is worthy of recognition. And anything between 90 and 100, I'm one of those who believes that there's no such thing as a 100. The number exists simply as the platonic form of a great oral argument. Judges will tell me, no, that was a 100. Okay, good. I wish I'd seen it. And then at the other end of the scale, we tell them, if you give a score below 60, especially at the international rounds, you are sending a very different message. And that message is tantamount to wasting the court's time. You know, that giving a 59 or a 55 or a 52 is going to make a coach sit up, or a dean back home sit up and say, why did we send you to Washington? And there are rounds that deserve that. And those, unfortunately, I have judged. A situation where the students are simply not by accident, not by ignorance, not by anything else, not taking the exercise seriously. And then I also tell them 75 is the average. And here in the United States, that's shocking. You know, if I have one student, one of my children is in high school and the other one is in middle school, and boy, if the average score at that middle school in algebra or in history or whatever was a 75, you'd have a lot of angry parents, because American parents expect their kids to be getting 90s and high 80s and so on and so forth. And it's grade inflation. I know in other countries, in South Asia, for example, a 75 is a fantastic score. If you see a 90, then there's either something wrong with the test or that student should be teaching the class. And every other country has its own biases. So given our globe-spanning judging corps, I do have to remind our judges that, you know, set aside whatever your national biases are regarding what those numbers mean. 75 is average. If you see a perfectly functional memorial that accomplishes goals, ticks the boxes, feel free to give it a 75 and feel free to grade around a 75. This was well above average. And so that is all the formal advice. I'm working with a couple of our pedagogues on a rubric, both for oral rounds and for memorials. It's still early days. Those of you who do teach for a living, or those of you with teacher training or pedagogy training, know that creating the first draft or the first version of a rubric is hard work. There's a lot of value assumptions that go into things and so on and so forth that don't necessarily need to be eliminated, but they need to be elucidated. And that's the stage we're at right now. I hope to have that out to the judges before the memorials are turned over for judging this year. That's my goal. You can also look on the ILSA website on the sort of main team page at the bottom where it's got all those team resources. It also has judge resources. So you can see exactly what we tell the judges. There are no secrets. So once that rubric is finished, that will also go on that page, so that you as coaches and advisors and teachers will be able to explain to your students what makes a great memorial or what makes a great oral argument in the context of the Jessup.
Thank you. Okay, so I think should probably wrap up there unless anybody has any final thoughts. And I want to thank everyone for joining. I hope this has been useful to you. For those of you who have also signed up for the 7th of September session, we will have different experienced coaches giving different perspective on that day. And thank you so much to Alan and Deep for their time and answering all of the questions today. And thank you very much for joining.